Right now, we are switching gears, talking about a mother and her daughter in Appleton who are working to get legislation passed that could save the life of someone with food allergies. So we want to bring in Kristen Allen joining me here at the First Alert Safety Desk talking about the Edina Act.
Yeah, the Edina Act would require drug makers for both prescription and over-the-counter drugs to disclose any potential food allergies on the label. The bill is named in honor of an 11-year-old girl in Minnesota who was hospitalized after taking a medication with an undisclosed allergen, and Congressman Mike Gallagher is an original co-sponsor of the bipartisan bill. It hits home for Kara Schneider and her daughter Deli. It was discovered Deli has a severe dairy allergy when she was just a baby. The pair have been advocating for years about food allergy awareness and have been to Washington, D.C. multiple times. You can see in their pictures here, they were just recently there to meet with lawmakers to talk about the Edina Act to get more of them interested in co-sponsoring this bill. With more than 20 million people in the U.S. living with food allergies, Kara and Deli say that it's critical this bill is passed.
The Edina Act is really going to be life-saving for anyone living with food allergies and or celiacs. The reactions that someone can have when they ingest something that they're allergic to can be deadly, and it just takes one little speck, and that mistake can cost someone their lives.
And the pair says, of course, that everyone's voice matters, encourages anyone, if you have a food allergy, if you know someone with a food allergy, to contact your local representatives and lawmakers to encourage them to pass this bill and tell them why it is so important and why it will have an impact on your life or the life of someone you know.
Okay, we'll keep following that, Kristen.
Definitely.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention now to